The Deathworlder Cadet stood in the training room, his chest heaving with barely contained energy. Alien drill sergeants, once confident in their rigorous training methods, watched from the sidelines, their antennae twitching nervously. The cadet's task was simple: complete a week-long course designed to break even the most resilient minds and bodies. He'd asked for a simple test, just one he could prove his worth with, but now they were regretting their decision. As the clock ticked, the cadet moved with terrifying precision. His reflexes were not like theirs. His body, toughened by the harshest environments known to the galaxy, adapted to every obstacle without hesitation. His actions were efficient, practical, and deadly. Each time the drill sergeants shouted commands, he responded with unmatched speed, leaving them no room to process his movements before he had already completed the task. The alien drill sergeants had designed the course to test every facet of endurance, intelligence, and combat strategy. It had been customized to push beings of various species to their breaking points. Their students, from various planets, had always required more time, days, sometimes weeks, to master the physical tasks, overcome mental barriers, and adapt to hostile environments simulated in the course. But this Deathworlder Cadet? He shattered every record they had ever set, rendering their complex tests useless in a matter of minutes. The drill sergeants exchanged worried glances. Their plans were falling apart. They'd designed this course to be a grueling battle of attrition, meant to weed out those who were not fit for the galaxy's highest ranks. But now, in the presence of this human, it was clear that the course could no longer serve as a true test. He was too fast, too strong, and above all, too intelligent to be beaten by their challenges. The pressure began to mount. The cadet wasn't just passing the tests, he was breaking them down, finding gaps in their methodology, exploiting their weaknesses with frightening ease. He wasn't just a student, he was a force of nature. It was as though he understood their methods better than they did themselves. This realization sent shivers down the spines of the sergeants. With each completed task, the cadets' confidence grew. But the aliens, those imposing figures who'd once been the masters of this testing ground, now found themselves questioning everything they knew about strength, adaptability, and resilience. The concept of the human, a species so young compared to theirs, so unrefined, crushed the carefully built pedestal upon which they stood. By the time the final test arrived, the aliens were more than concerned, they were desperate. They couldn't let this human expose their methods as flawed. The elders, the most powerful beings in their society, had warned them about humans, but they hadn't taken it seriously. The human race had been marked as too unpredictable, a simple species to be monitored, never studied. Their curiosity about humans had been underestimated. Now, the course that had been their pride was crumbling, all thanks to one Deathworlder Cadet who had done what no other had dared. In the final hour, the cadet showed no signs of slowing. He completed the most difficult simulations with terrifying speed. There was no panic, no uncertainty in his movements, just focused, relentless precision. The sergeants were stunned, frozen in disbelief as the cadet effortlessly navigated the final set of trials. He had finished the entire week's worth of training in less than 60 minutes, with time to spare. The silence that followed was deafening. They had no words to describe what had just happened. They were left with nothing but the unsettling truth that their course, their beliefs, and their entire system had been rendered obsolete by one human cadet who had shattered their understanding of what strength truly was. But beyond the shock, there was a darker realization. The Deathworlder had just proven that their invincible training methods could be dismantled by a force they could never predict: human ingenuity and sheer will. It was the kind of victory that spelled not just the end of a course, but the beginning of a new era, one in which humans would no longer be underestimated. The alien drill sergeants paced nervously, the tension in the air thick with disbelief. Their final decision to allow the human cadet to take the week-long training course had been a calculated risk. They believed that no being could ever complete it in the allotted time. After all, the course had been designed with the toughest species in mind: creatures born and bred on hostile worlds, warriors forged through generations of brutal evolution. It was a proving ground for the strongest, the most cunning, the most enduring. But this human, this Deathworlder, was different. From the moment the training began, the sergeants realized that their belief in the invincibility of their system was a fragile illusion. The human's physical endurance was beyond anything they had encountered. He moved with the grace and power of an apex predator. Every obstacle, every challenge that would have exhausted or disoriented any other participant, was met by the cadet with almost unnatural speed and focus. It wasn't just the brute force or the quick reflexes that set him apart, it was his adaptability. He seemed to understand the intent behind each trial before the sergeants had even finished explaining it. They used the most advanced technologies, simulations, and traps, assuming they could outsmart the cadet with unpredictability, yet he anticipated their every move, as though he had seen it all before. The drills, once so effective, now felt like child's play. The sergeants tried everything to throw him off. They adjusted the difficulty, added more complications, incorporated sensory overloads to confuse and disorient. But nothing worked. The human didn't just endure. It was as though he thrived under pressure, as though each obstacle fueled him to push harder, faster, further. In their frustration, the sergeants began to question whether they had underestimated the human race entirely. The Deathworlders were supposed to be reckless, unpredictable, chaotic, traits that made them dangerous but also easy to manipulate. They had expected their training to break the cadet, to show him the limits of his body and mind. But with every challenge he faced, the limits of the aliens' training methods became painfully clear. The course was designed to test more than just physical strength. It was meant to assess the psychological resilience of the participants, to measure how well they could cope with failure, frustration, and fatigue. Yet the human cadet seemed impervious to these pressures. Where others would break down under stress, he simply grew more focused, more determined. It was as though he viewed failure not as a setback but as another challenge to conquer. As the hours ticked by, the tension only grew. The cadet showed no signs of slowing down, no indication that he was beginning to tire. He moved faster, smarter, and more efficiently than any of the sergeants had expected. With each new test, the sergeants found themselves more and more unsure of how to proceed. They couldn't even tell whether the cadet was aware of how thoroughly he was outmatching them, or if he simply didn't care. But it didn't matter. He was winning, and they were losing. They were faced with a reality they hadn't anticipated. The Deathworlder was not just a threat to their training systems. He was a threat to everything they believed about their superiority. His success was a direct challenge to the very foundation of their teachings, to the idea that their race's advanced methods of training could never be outpaced. The human had shattered that illusion in the span of a few hours. By the time the final challenge came, the alien sergeants were no longer certain they even wanted the cadet to succeed. They had hoped that their tests, which had been so effective for generations, would be enough to crush him. Instead, they found themselves watching in awe as he effortlessly tackled the most difficult trial of all. It was supposed to be the ultimate test, one that had defeated even the toughest of their own kind. But the cadet approached it with the same unflinching resolve, finishing it in a fraction of the time it had taken others to even understand its complexities. The sergeants, once so confident in their training methods, were left speechless. What had just happened was something they had never expected, something they couldn't even fully comprehend. The human had not only completed the course, but he had done so in a way that made their entire system seem obsolete. What they had seen as an ultimate test, the pinnacle of their training, was reduced to a mere stepping stone for this Deathworlder cadet. And in that moment, they understood the true nature of human strength, not just their physical prowess, but their capacity to challenge and dismantle systems thought to be invincible. The cadet's success was not just a triumph over the course, it was a message. A warning. The human species was not to be underestimated. The sergeants had tried to contain him, to prove their superiority, but in the end, it was the humans who had outsmarted them. The alien drill sergeants, having watched the cadet progress through the course with stunning ease, now found themselves cornered by a new realization. They had underestimated not only the Deathworlder's physical prowess but his mental adaptability as well. The very fabric of their training was being pulled apart, thread by thread. Each challenge they threw at him was met with unwavering confidence, with precision, and an almost eerie understanding of what was needed to overcome it. What was supposed to be a week-long ordeal for any participant had become a mere warm-up for this human. As the cadet breezed through the simulations, the sergeants began to lose their composure. They had prided themselves on creating an environment that could break even the strongest minds. But here was this human, completing tasks faster than any of their species, navigating obstacles designed to trap even the most resourceful beings. It wasn't just his strength that was overwhelming, it was the efficiency with which he approached every problem. Every action was deliberate, each movement fluid, like a well-oiled machine. The Deathworlder's understanding of tactics, his ability to remain unflustered by unpredictability, was far beyond their expectations. The sergeants had expected the human to falter at some point. They thought that fatigue, the mounting pressure of the course, or perhaps the emotional strain of its complexity would get to him. But instead, he only grew more focused with each passing minute. It was as if the more pressure they applied, the stronger he became. They could see the other cadets, many of them struggling, their bodies and minds pushed to their limits. But the human didn't just endure, he excelled. It was as though he was operating on a level they had never considered. They could not fathom how a creature so young, a species so primitive by their standards, could possess such remarkable resilience. The human wasn't simply completing the tasks, he was transforming them. Every obstacle he encountered was not a challenge, but an opportunity for him to showcase how easily their advanced systems could be outpaced, outsmarted, and surpassed. The alien drill sergeants were no longer in control. They were witnesses to the unraveling of their entire belief system. One by one, the sergeants tried to create new hurdles, an elaborate obstacle course, an extended endurance test, a combat simulation that was supposed to be impossible to complete in less than a few hours. Yet the cadet moved through them like a storm, dismantling each one with the same efficiency that had stunned them from the beginning. They had expected him to reach his breaking point, to show signs of wear and tear, but instead, he appeared more determined, more in control with each challenge. With every second that passed, the gravity of the situation settled in. The human wasn't just completing the course, he was demonstrating that their entire system of training was not designed to prepare anyone for true success. They had built an environment based on assumption, the assumption that only the strongest species, the ones born in the most unforgiving environments, could rise to the top. But this human had shattered that assumption. His strength lay not just in his body, but in his mind, his ability to adapt, and most terrifying of all, his complete lack of hesitation. The cadet didn't ask questions, didn't falter. He moved through their challenges with a calm, unnerving focus, as if everything he did was just part of the natural order. There was no awe, no grand display of effort. It was as if he was just doing what needed to be done, without hesitation or doubt. And that was what made the sergeants fear him the most, the sheer simplicity of his mastery. He made the impossible seem effortless, turning their toughest trials into mundane tasks, tasks that, in his hands, didn't even require the slightest bit of struggle. The sergeants watched, paralyzed by the realization that they were no longer in charge. Their tests were meaningless, their confidence in their methods utterly crushed. They had thought themselves untouchable, masters of training, able to mold warriors from any species, from any world. Yet here, now, they were nothing more than spectators as a single Deathworlder cadet obliterated everything they had worked for. The implications of his success stretched far beyond this course. If this human could do this here, what would he accomplish in the galaxy? What other systems of power would he destroy with the same ease? The final bell rang, signaling the end of the course. The cadet stood in the center of the room, unscathed, unfazed. The sergeants stared at him in disbelief. The human had finished it all, not in the days they had allotted, but in a fraction of that time. In the space of an hour, he had dismantled their entire system, broken their pride, and exposed their fragile belief in their superiority. There was nothing more to say, no excuse to offer. The Deathworlder had won. The sergeants were left to confront A. The room was silent, the air heavy with the realization that the course had been irreparably changed. The cadet stood motionless, his breathing steady as if he had just finished a simple walk. The alien drill sergeants, their once unshakable confidence now shattered, could not bring themselves to speak. They had designed this test to separate the weak from the strong, the unworthy from the worthy. But now, they had witnessed something that defied everything they had built their training around. For hours they had watched as this human cadet had breezed through challenge after challenge, each task meant to break him. The physical trials, the mental puzzles, the complex combat simulations, all designed to bring the toughest warriors to their knees. Yet the cadet had shown no signs of weakness, no hesitation, no uncertainty. Every obstacle he faced was met with absolute efficiency, each action performed with the precision of a seasoned veteran, not the untested mind of a young cadet. The sergeants could feel it now, an overwhelming sense of vulnerability. Their world, one built on the superiority of their methods, had been cracked open. They had assumed that no one could move faster, think clearer, or endure more than the species that had created these tests. But here was the human, proving them wrong. It was not just the brute strength of his body that had allowed him to complete the course in record time. It was his strategic mind, his ability to break down each task and understand its core purpose before the drill sergeants had even finished giving their orders. The human had, in essence, outwitted them at their own game. The drill sergeants had spent centuries perfecting their techniques, refining the methods that had made them the dominant force in training across the galaxy. They had prided themselves on their ability to mold warriors from any species, to break down the weaknesses and fears of those who sought to rise through the ranks. Yet, in the face of this Deathworlder, they saw the terrifying truth: their system had no room for creatures like him. He was an anomaly, a being who could not be controlled, who could not be broken, who could not be molded into something they could define. As the seconds ticked by, the sergeants' minds raced. They had trained beings from dozens of planets, and none had ever come close to mastering the course so effortlessly. They had built their reputation on being the best. No other training program in the galaxy had ever been able to compare. But this human, in less than an hour, had destroyed the foundation of that reputation. He had shown them that their methods, their pride, their certainty in their superiority, were all fragile illusions, easily shattered by someone who understood the true nature of the challenges they imposed. The sergeant's thoughts turned to the elders, the supreme beings who had instructed them to observe the human cadet's progress. The elders had long maintained that humans were unpredictable, wild, and dangerous, not because of their physical power, but because of their capacity for resistance, for rebellion. The elders feared humanity's ability to inspire defiance, to challenge systems that had been in place for millennia. They had not been wrong in their assessment. The human had proven them right in ways that were unimaginable. It wasn't just the course he had conquered, it was the system behind it. He had exposed the cracks in the foundation of the very principles that governed their training. And now, as the sergeants stood in silence, they could feel the weight of that realization. They had not just lost the challenge. They had lost something far greater: their confidence in their own methods. The human had broken the cycle, the expectation, and the illusion that their training was unassailable. The room was thick with tension. No words could fix what had just happened. There was nothing left to say. The sergeants were left with the stark understanding that their beliefs had been torn apart by a single human cadet. He had done what no one had ever thought possible. He had dismantled their entire system of training in less than 60 minutes, and in doing so, had shattered the illusion of their superiority. For a long moment, the sergeants simply stared at the cadet, unable to comprehend the full magnitude of what had transpired. They had been forced to confront an undeniable truth: humanity, for all its flaws and unpredictability, possessed a power they could not measure, a strength they could not define. It wasn't just about raw physical power. It was about the unyielding will, the ability to adapt, and the drive to succeed against all odds. The human had shown them that. And in that moment, the galaxy's perception of humanity had irrevocably changed. The cadet, having finished the course, turned and walked out of the room. The sergeants remained motionless, haunted by the realization that they had witnessed the rise of a force unlike anything they had ever known. The Deathworlder had won, not just the course, but the future. The future that now belonged to humanity.